Welcome to the Folktale Project. This is Dan Scholes. Today we have our final part of Little Grey Mouse by Countess Sophie de Ségur, or at least our last part this week. We'll be picking up next week with the concluding two portions of the tale. And in this part, part 3, we're going to meet the Prince Gracious, who was alluded to in the previous chapter, and we're also going to meet a temptation for our dear friend, Rosalie. In the last episode, we left Rosalie asleep in a forest, after being chased away from every location at which she sought lodging because of, well, the fairy detestable at her heel. This is the Prince Gracious. While Rosalie was thus quietly sleeping, the Prince Gracious was engaged in a hunt through the forest by torchlight. The fawn, pursued fiercely by the dogs, came trembling with terror to crouch down near the brook by which Rosalie was sleeping. The dogs and gamekeepers sprang forward after the fawn. Suddenly, the dogs ceased barking and grouped themselves silently around Rosalie. The prince dismounted from his horse to set the dogs again upon the trail of the deer, but what was his surprise to see a lovely young girl asleep in this lonely forest. He looked carefully around, but saw no one else. She was indeed alone, abandoned. On examining her more closely, he saw traces of tears upon her cheeks, and indeed they were still escaping slowly from her closed eyelids. Rosalie was simply clothed, but the richness of her silk denoted wealth. Her fine white hands, her rosy nails, her beautiful chestnut locks carefully and tastefully arranged with a gold comb, her elegant boots, and a necklace of pure pearls indicated elevated rank. Rosalie did not awake, notwithstanding the stamping of the horses, the baying of the dogs, and the noisy tumult made by a crowd of sportsmen. The prince was stupefied, and stood gazing steadily at Rosalie. No one present recognized her. Anxious and disquieted by this profound sleep, the Prince Gracious took her hand softly. Rosalie still slept. The prince pressed her hand lightly in his, but even this did not awaken her. Turning to his officers, he said, "I cannot abandon this unfortunate child who has been perhaps led astray by some design, the victim of some cruel wickedness." "But how can she be removed while she is asleep, Prince?" said Hubert, his principal gamekeeper. "Can we not make a litter of branches and thus remove her to some hostel in the neighborhood while your highness continues the chase?" "Your idea is good, Hubert. Make the litter, and we will immediately place her upon it. Only, you will not carry her to a hostel, but to my palace. This young maiden is assuredly of high birth, and she is beautiful as an angel. I will watch over her myself, so that she may receive the care and attention to which she is entitled." Hubert, with the assistance of his men, soon arranged the litter upon which Prince Gracious spread his mantle. Then, approaching Rosalie, who was still sleeping softly, he gently raised her in his arms and laid her upon the cloak. At this moment, Rosalie seemed to be dreaming. She smiled and murmured in low tones, my father saved forever! The queen of the fairies! The Prince Gracious, I see him! He is charming!" The prince, surprised to hear his name pronounced, did not doubt that Rosalie was a princess under some cruel enchantment. He commanded his gamekeepers to walk very softly so as not to wake her, and he walked by the side of the litter. On arriving at the palace, Prince Gracious ordered that the queen's apartment should be prepared for Rosalie. He suffered no one to touch her, but carried her himself to her chamber, and laid her gently upon the bed, ordering the women who were to wait upon her and watch over her to apprise him as soon as she awaked. Then, casting a farewell look upon the sad, sweet face of the sleeper, he strode from the room. Rosalie slept tranquilly until morning. The sun was shining brightly when she awoke. She looked about her with great surprise. The wicked mouse was not near her to terrify her. It had happily disappeared. "Am I delivered from this wicked fairy detestable?" she said joyfully. "Am I in the hands of a fairy more powerful than herself?" Rosalie now stepped to the window and saw many armed men and many officers dressed in brilliant uniforms. More and more surprised, she was about to call one of the men, whom she believed to be either genii or enchanters, when she heard footsteps approaching. She turned and saw the Prince Gracious, clothed in an elegant and rich hunting dress, standing before her and regarding her with admiration. Rosalie immediately recognized the prince of her dream and cried out involuntarily, "The Prince Gracious!" "You know me, then?" said the prince in amazement. "How, if you have ever known me, could I have forgotten your name and features?" "I have only seen you in my dreams, Prince," said Rosalie, blushing. "As to my name, you could not possibly know it, since I myself did not know my father's name until yesterday." "And what is the name, may I ask, which has been concealed from you so long?" Rosalie then told him all that she had heard from her father. She frankly confessed her culpable curiosity and its terrible consequences. "Judge of my grief, Prince, when I was compelled to leave my father in order to escape the flames which the wicked fairy had lighted, when, rejected everywhere because of the wicked mouse, I found myself exposed to death from hunger and thirst. Soon, however, a heavy sleep took possession of me, during which I had many strange dreams. I do not know how I came here, or whether it is in your palace that I find myself." Gracious then related to Rosalie how he had found her asleep in the forest and the words which she had heard her utter in her dream. He then added, "There is one thing your father did not tell you, Rosalie. That is, that the Queen of the Fairies, who is our relation, has decided that we should be married when you are 15 years of age. It was no doubt the Queen of the Fairies who inspired me with the desire to go hunting by torchlight in order that I might find you in the forest where you had wandered. Since you will be 15 in a few days, Rosalie, deign to consider my palace as your own, and command here in advance as my queen. Your father will soon be restored to you, and we will celebrate our happy marriage." Rosalie thanked her young and handsome cousin heartily, and then returned to her chamber, where she found her maids awaiting her with a wonderful selection of rich and splendid robes and headdresses. Rosalie, who had never given much attention to her toilet, took the first dress which was presented to her. It was of rose-colored gauze, ornamented with fine lace, and with a headdress of lace and moss rosebuds. Her beautiful chestnut hair was arranged in bands, forming a crown. When her toilet was completed, the prince came to conduct her to breakfast. Rosalie ate like a person who had not dined the day before. After the repast, the prince led her to the garden and conducted her to the greenhouses, which were very magnificent. At the end of one of the hothouses there was a little rotunda, ornamented with choice flowers. In the center of this rotunda there was a large case, which seemed to contain a tree, but a thick, heavy cloth was thrown over it and tightly sewed together. Through the cloth, however, could be seen a number of points of extraordinary brilliancy. And there we will leave Rosalie until next week. And yes, they're cousins, but remember the time period in which this is written, and remember that royalty was often married to cousins. The more troubling thing in my mind is that she is, 14. This is Dan Scholes for the Folktale Project. Don't forget that you can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, Overcast, anywhere you like to get your podcasts. You can follow us on Twitter at Folktale Project. You can find us on Auto Radio, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, Spotify, anywhere you like to listen. And you can always head over to folktaleproject.com, where you'll find a new story waiting for you every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. We'll be back next week with the remaining 2 chapters in this story of The Little Grey Mouse by Countess Sophie de Ségur. As always, thank you so much for listening.